Welcome to a special edition of the Roy's Report. I'm Julie Royce, and this is a departure from our usual podcast videos. It's really just an opportunity for me to respond to some feedback that I received after we published a podcast about 3 weeks ago by Shelley Hundley. Shelley is a former leader at the International House of Prayer in Kansas City. And the purpose of the podcast was for her to explain how Mike Bickle had groomed her so that he could actually abuse some of the friends that were closest to her. It was a powerful podcast. I think we had over 70,000 views of that podcast on YouTube alone, not to mention our other channels. And most of the feedback I received was that this was really eye-opening to hear from Shelley and to hear how a cult-like culture, how that operates, and how people really are conditioned to ignore red flags that they normally would see and they would notice. But in this kind of system with the grooming, it slowly, it's like the frog in the kettle, right? I mean, it slowly conditions you, it normalizes the abnormal. And how Mike did that just masterfully. So it was a podcast I think was really, really helpful for a lot of people, but there's a group of people who I think it wasn't helpful for, and they reached out to me and said, this was really triggering for me. And I saw some of the comments of some of you on social media as well. And the reason being that some of you feel that Shelley, that she spiritually abused you when she was a leader at the International House of Prayer. And some people said, they've received apologies from Shelley. There's been some reconciliation. Some felt like the apologies didn't go far enough, and that really is between them and Shelley. Some said, I don't even think Shelley's aware that she harmed me, but she did. And because of this, again, I think it opened a wound for some people that was really, really raw. And I just want to say, I'm sorry. I didn't know the depth of pain and the harm that was there. And I certainly would have navigated this interview differently had I realized it, or just decided not to do it. But I just didn't know. And in fairness to Shelley, she did say that she owned a lot of the complicity that she felt for what had happened there. And she even said she was working through a lot of things. She said some of these things, and honestly, I processed it like I didn't see it as a big deal. And I tell you why is because there's not a single person that I've interviewed who has been a part at one point of one of these toxic, abusive systems that at some level doesn't feel complicit for it. That is a common dynamic. So I didn't get what a big deal some of the things she was saying was. And here's what's so sad is that those got edited out of the podcast. And so I feel like, in fairness to Shelley, because what I sensed from Shelley wasn't that she was being defensive. I actually felt like she was owning a lot, and I felt like she was processing through a lot. But some of you didn't hear that, and I think this would have impacted you differently. Now, for some of you, you may hear the clips that I'm going to play in this podcast and be like, boy, that's too little too late, or that doesn't go near far enough. And I'm not one to judge that, right? Because I didn't walk in your shoes. I didn't experience it, but I just wanted, in fairness to Shelley, to be able to play those so that you could hear them, and hopefully that some of this might be healing for you. And I also want to address, there's some other things that have been raised about Shelley, and we'll get into more of this, but relating to her involvement in the Tyler Deaton cult, and specifically when Bethany Deaton was killed or took her own life. Again, that's an issue that's up for discussion. But we'll get into some of that as well. But first, I do want to address the abuse allegations from Shelley herself. And I want you to hear some of these things that got edited out of the podcast that I think, just in fairness to her, that you should hear. So here's one of those clips that I'd like you to hear.
I really think that Mike used cult tactics. I think he is a cult leader. I'm not ready to understand the whole big dynamic of IHOP in general. Like, give me some years. I don't even know how to parse it all. But I will say that with his victims, he was just a cult leader with these women. I mean, the way that he used prophetic words to lock them in, the way he, you know, won their whole family systems. But the spiritual part, I don't think people have understood how deep that is. And perhaps even for the body of Christ, I have a million questions. Like, how do we walk this out? How do we do this in a way that can't be used to harm people or be used as kind of a power trip system of people who are able to speak this? And I'm not entirely comfortable with my own leadership dynamics or how I walked those things out during those years, because I look back and I go, I participated in this system of kind of worship of Mike, and I participated in wanting to keep this daughter relationship with him and wanting to get things done the way he wanted them done, or move the person from their class if he needed them to be moved, or just, I wanted his approval. When I would speak at a conference of, our biggest one that had like 40,000 people at its height, the young adult conference, I didn't care so much about how everybody felt about it. I did care about how the Lord felt about it. I wasn't completely out of my sincerity, but I cared so deeply about what Mike thought. I cared so deeply about whether he thought I was doing good or bad. It was deep. It took years for that to even be pulled out of me. And so with these girls, you take that and you go, he prophesies to them. And also because of who Mike is, his teaching on, the intimacy with God, on the love of God. It's such an identity teaching that it becomes gelled with this bond with him. And I've talked to people who, over the last 2 years, just kind of scooping up anyone I can along the way that are struggling through all of the debacle of this, who've never been in a room with Mike, never met him, and are in a deep spiral over their spiritual life because his message was personal. He wasn't just saying, like, here's 5 ways to, I don't know, live a godly life in your workplace. Like, he was saying, this is who you are. You are the beloved of God. You are this to God. God feels this way about you. And so the message and the person merged. And for these young women that he gathered around, their whole families worshiped him.
Well, again, that's Shelley, a part of a clip. Some of that was included in the podcast and some of it wasn't, but I just wanted you to hear more of that in context. I also have some clips. We did a pre-interview, and Shelley had recorded that, and I think she even expressed how she felt about her role at IHOP more explicitly in that pre-interview. And so I just have a really short clip, but I'd just like you to hear that to, again, hear her heart about how she feels about her participation.
It definitely got me to participate in and help a toxic leadership dynamic that I just, deeply regret being a part of upholding a lot of the culture of that. And there wasn't a specific moment of, I did something immoral and horrible, but in general, the leadership was just so unhealthy. And here was this girl who would just kind of do anything for her new father figure. And so I just remember, just doing things in terms of the leadership of just kind of like, I'm going to get it done. I'll remove that teacher from that class. I'll have the hard conversation so he doesn't have to have it, or I'll do this within the Bible school context or whatever. And all of it at the core is just the profound brokenness of a girl who thought she had experienced the ultimate loving father who happened to be this great preacher on the love of God. I mean, it just felt like, in many ways, I think I felt like I had it made in that sense,
And one thing I have heard from even those who were very triggered by this, none of them have doubted that Shelley was groomed and abused by Mike Bickle. And I think that these are one of I think with what's happened at IHOP, there's been so much really discussion and wrestling with the abused becoming the abuser and how we detangle from that. And some of them aren't detangled right now. I mean, are still very much a part of that system and still a part with Mike, which is is just a really sad, sort of tragic part of this. But I do think that Shelley is one who is in process of trying to figure that out. And again, I wasn't there at the time when a lot of these toxic dynamics were going on, and I know for a lot of you that you need to hear a lot more and process a lot more. And so I don't mean to rush that or even advocate. My only thing that I want to advocate for here is truth and for healing. There's another part that came up in this interview, and honestly, I didn't do a lot of research on what had happened with Bethany Deaton and her mysterious death. Again, for those, I'm assuming most of you watching this have seen the podcast already, but just in case, Bethany Deaton was someone who was part of this cult that was led by her husband, Tyler Deaton, and she was found in a van in 2012 with a bag over her head. She was dead with a plastic bag over her head, a suicide note. And, there's just been a lot of speculation whether this was murder or whether this was suicide. Initially, police ruled it a suicide. But then one of the members of this cult, Micah Moore, he confessed to her murder, saying that Tyler put him up to committing this murder. And he spent 2 years imprisoned in jail until his case was actually dismissed for a lack of evidence. So there's been a lot of question about Shelley's involvement in the aftermath of Bethany's death and with Micah Moore's confession. This is one of these situations, again, I didn't do a ton of research because I knew, talking to Shelley in that pre-interview, that she wouldn't be able to discuss the very many of the details of what had transpired because this is an open investigation. And that's something that I reached out to authorities about and talked to Rhonda Montgomery there at the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, and she confirmed this is an open investigation. And so I was like, well, I will mention it just so that you can say that you can't talk about it. I mean, that was really the extent of what I thought we were going to discuss. Now, I mentioned something when I was introducing it, and I said that Tyler Deaton and this cult were sort of tangentially related to IHOP. And that made some people very angry because people were like, well, no, Tyler Deaton wasn't tangential to IHOP. He was very integral to it. He graduated from IHOP U, which is true. He did. Shelley had been, I think his teacher had taught some of his classes. So that is true. However, I talked to a former member of Tyler Deaton's cult, and my understanding is this is the first person to ever talk publicly about what actually happened. Now, there is a cult member who did talk. I think his name is Bose, and he had spoken about his involvement with the cult, but he was not a part of the cult. He had left several months before Bethany's death. So this is the first person who's actually come forward for an interview publicly about what happened, who was a member of the cult when Bethany died. That is one of the most powerful interviews I've ever done. It will be released soon, and you will hear a first-person account. And I will say, when I recorded this was just going to be a print story because this person did not want to go on the record with their name. I have confirmed this person's identity, but it was such a powerful wow. I mean, I just, you have to listen to this podcast that I will be releasing soon. So powerful. And she gets into the whole deliverance night that is referenced by Micah's attorney, who was trying to get him off of that murder charge. All of that is a part of the interview, and she was there. She's a firsthand witness. So you're going to want to listen to this, and it will be coming. But I bring that up just to say, when I asked her, well, how much a part of IHOP was Tyler Deaton's cult, and she said, really, we were very separate. And she said Tyler, when he graduated from IHOP U, he was hoping that he would be mentored by one of the big leaders there, like Alan Hood, or somebody would take him under their wing and would mentor him. And he kind of got passed up, and he was resentful, is what she said. I won't get into all the specifics of it because she does describe it in more detail. But she said no IHOP leader ever came to any of our meetings. We had meetings practically every night, so we couldn't be very involved in IHOP. So again, a lot of the members of that cult ended up, graduating from IHOP U, or went to classes there, or hung out at the 24/7 prayer room. But they weren't. I kind of stand by that from everybody I've talked to. I think they were tangentially connected to the International House of Prayer. And they really started back when they were at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. That's really where it began. And they were called a cult there. And then they came to IHOP. They did look up to, Mike Bickle. They did want to model themselves somewhat after it, but Tyler was really a larger-than-life figure in that cult. And I'm not sure that there would have been room for another cult leader like Mike. So I do think tangentially associated or related to IHOP is an accurate description of that group. But there's been a lot of discussion on social media about Shelley's involvement with Micah Moore's confession. So what happened was Micah Moore, again, confessed to Bethany's murder. The first place that he confessed it was in what's been called this deliverance session. It was a prayer time at the Shiloh building there at IHOP. And the idea that, or this notion that Shelley had coerced, had used the prophetic in a manipulative way, that Micah Moore had been up for 24 hours straight, and that this was just, psychotic break or something, that he confessed this crime. That was a narrative. And I just feel like I have to address this because I've seen this document. It's a court document circulating. And that is the narrative that is forwarded in this court document. Whether it's true or false, I don't know. But I will say this is a defense motion. So I was a little surprised how people were quoting it like it's gospel truth. This is a defense motion made by Micah Moore's attorney. So as a defense motion, as a defense attorney is trying to get his client off of murder, this is a biased source. And so I just, it's a data point for sure. It's something to look at. It's something to evaluate. Is it true? But it is, again, not something I would take as gospel truth. Now, again, I wasn't there, and I don't have a dog in this fight, right? But I'm just saying, as a journalist looking at this, what I wanted to do is talk to firsthand sources who were there. And what I'm surprised to find out is that there's basically the cult members, and then there were a few IHOP leaders. And those are the only people who were there. So there's a very small group of people who know what actually happened. Again, one of those people you'll be hearing from in an upcoming podcast. But I did reach out to Captain Rhonda Montgomery. Again, she's the one I had spoken with earlier for the podcast about the investigation being open. So I reached out to her and I wanted to ask her about this confession. So I specifically asked her, this is an email communication. I said, on what basis was Micah Moore charged? Was it his confession to police or the alleged confession to Shelley prior to coming to the police station? Because what I learned is that Micah confessed in this prayer session, but then he also went to the police station, and at least what sources told me was that he confessed there to police. She responded to me, I cannot comment on behalf of the prosecutor's office. This question would best be answered by trained team leader Ms. Tracy Stansel, who had handled the original charges. I reached out to Ms. Stansel. She hasn't responded to me. I hope she does at some point, because I think she could really give some clarity to this, but she did not respond to me. But I did ask her specifically, do police believe that Micah Moore's confession was coerced? She said no. Micah Moore made a confession to law enforcement independent to what he told members from the International House of Prayer. So that's what police say. Again, when we aired the initial podcast, I didn't realize how important this issue was. Again, the focus of our podcast was really on Mike Bickle and the way that he had groomed Shelley so that he could get close and abuse her friends. That said, some of the interview, and again, this is just really unfortunate because I didn't understand how sensitive this was. Some of the interview with Shelley, where she talked about the dynamics and what happened in the aftermath of Bethany's death and the pastoral role that she played, that got cut. And so you didn't hear a full account from her. And I just feel, again, in fairness to her, because this has become such a controversy, I want to give you a chance to hear more of what she said in that interview so you can judge for yourselves. So you guys were tasked with the job of investigating this, and I don't know what you can even say about it, but yeah. And I know that you've told me that you can't say very much because it's an open investigation. So, but yeah, what happened there from your perspective, as much as you can tell?
Yeah, and we weren't tasked to investigate it, Alan and I. We were the pastoral support for a tragedy. That's kind of really what happened. I mean, we weren't, in that sense, we were there to help with this tragic death. But yeah, as the storyline evolved, it was clear that the police needed to be involved in what was going on, and what was unfolding and what was coming out related to it. And it is a tough one for me because, and the only reason I'm clarifying that is because I could never investigate. You know what I mean? I wouldn't be able to investigate. But as two pastoral people, we were there to support what seemed like a tragic death, and then there were occurrences that happened that involved the police and suggested that there was perhaps something else that had gone on, and it's still open. They're still pursuing what really happened to Bethany. And Alan and I got to meet with her parents and just sob with them, and it's just a complete tragic. I feel like there's so much storyline about what happened, and it's really painful to me because I would be greatly served by doing this is exactly what happened and what my involvement was, in the sense that it would help clarify a lot of my role in that. And I understand that there are painful narratives out there about how everyone felt, how things were communicated, what went on in the church, which I wasn't really as much of a part of afterwards, how they communicated it. There's just a lot of feelings about all of it that are really valid. But at the very center of it is this girl and her parents and the story and the truth of it. And as you mentioned, I have checked very recently with the police again. I can't talk about the details of what happened until the case is resolved. And it's my understanding that they have evidence being brought in, even in recent times, into the case. They still want to hear more. And so I would just say, for anyone that's even was involved or was there, I've only talked to a few people who were actually present in some of it. And yeah, there was this whole group that Tyler Deaton had under him, and people experienced all kinds of dynamics in that. And the ones I've talked to, have a lot of gratitude for that group ending and for them being out of it and moving on with their lives. So there's that. But if anybody would have the courage to still continue to give information to the police about it, I think I would want to say to do that. I want truth to come forth for Bethany and for her parents in its fullness. I don't have a specific agenda related to what that truth looks like, and I never did. I just, in that situation, it's very rare in a pastoral case that you go from pastoring and helping to counsel grief to it being something that has to involve the police. And this was one of those times. And so I think I hope for this sense of healing, because I've experienced over the last couple of years a lot of pain, a lot of questions, a lot of heartache. And I think there's a lot of valid hurts out there about the whole situation and what happened to Bethany and how was it all handled. And I'm hoping that there'll be a day when we can talk it through, but I wouldn't jeopardize Bethany's parents and her family getting to hear the truth of what happened, which I just hope becomes completely clear and completely evident in that story. But it is tragic, and it was a really difficult time for everybody, and it did lead in a kind of odd way to me leaving the organization. I had to leave for a while, and then I came back briefly, and it did lead to me leaving, and in that sense created a whole different chapter of my life for me.
Well, again, Shelley doesn't address specifically the allegations that she had coerced in some way Micah Moore giving a confession, but she does claim that she had no agenda. And at the end, whether you believe that or not, that's up to you. But she does at the end. She also mentions that this had to do with her leaving IHOP, and that is something that became an issue, I know, for some of the folks I talked to, because some of that got cut out, and you'll hear more in the next clip. Actually, the last clip I'm going to play you, where she talks more about, some of the dynamics of why she left. But one of the reasons that she left, that really didn't come out in the podcast, but she did say in the podcast interview, again, it got clipped out, got edited out, was that, as you just heard, that this situation with Tyler Deaton, that led to her leaving. The question is, well, why did she leave, right? And this is what tripped some people up, because they were like, wait, when she was at IHOP, she said her life was in danger, that some of the cult members were coming after her and she had to leave. And then they didn't hear this in the podcast, and they're like, was that just all made up? Did she just making up, wild stories? I mean, that's what it sounds like. She was saying some crazy stuff, is what they were saying to me. So what I did is I circled back with Shelley, and I asked her, and honestly, you guys, it's taken 3 weeks to release this, and a lot of it's been because I wanted to talk to a lot of folks about this, and it was helpful hearing from folks. But I did circle back with Shelley, and this is what she said to me. She said that ADA Stansel, the Assistant District Attorney, Tracy Stansel, recommended I leave Kansas City, and I did so voluntarily, coordinating with the police regarding my safety. So was Shelley really in danger? Did she believe she was in danger? Did authorities believe she was in danger? Again, I reached out to ADA Stansel. She didn't get back to me. However, I did talk to police, and something else that Shelley had mentioned is, and she sent it to me, was there was an affidavit that became public related to the Deaton murder investigation, what was called a murder investigation at that time. That affidavit had her address in it. And you can see, we're putting up on the screen now, you can see there's her home address was right in that affidavit. And it was after that got released, that apparently authorities especially thought that she might be in danger. Again, remember at this time, Bethany had just died, and there was one of the cult members saying he had killed her. So a little different situation than how people may be feeling today, because that case was dismissed and there's just so much uncertainty. Again, maybe people leaning more towards that it was a suicide, although when I talk to police, I think the sense I get with them is it's almost 50-50, or maybe leaning a little more on the side of the murder investigation, but just feeling like they haven't been able to get to the bottom of it. And it may be a cold case, maybe one of those that never gets solved. I don't know. I truly, truly hope it does get solved. But I did circle back with Captain Montgomery about this as well to see if she would give me any insight. So I asked her specifically, again, this was an email interaction, where were the police and district attorney's office concerned for Shelley's safety following Micah Moore's confession? If so, can you explain why and what actions the police or the DA took to protect her? She responded back, yes. Law enforcement received credible information of people actively threatening and following Shelley after her name and address were released in a court document. I cannot comment on behalf of the prosecutor's office regarding any knowledge or actions they took in the case. However, the sheriff's office is fully aware Shelley took immediate action to protect herself, to include voluntarily leaving the Kansas City metro area. So there is corroboration to Shelley's claim that she left for her own safety, and feeling like it wasn't safe to be there in Kansas City. But as is often the case, it's complicated. She left, she came back, and then she feels, that she got pushed out. And some of that I'm going to play in this clip to give you, again, a more fuller understanding of what she told me. But also, she did get married, and she did choose another life with her husband, and now their children. And so that's part of the story, too, of why she left. But let me play this final clip, and then I have just a few concluding words.
I don't think any of us really knew the toxic traits, let alone, of course, we didn't know the abuse dynamics. But somewhere in the mix of that, and this is curious to me, came up when I did my interview for the IHOP investigation with the Firefly organization. At the very end was just this spin-off conversation about, why did Mike try to destroy me as a person who could ever connect to IHOP again? And he did. There were rumors that were fueled. There were, and they're too outlandish to even mention. I mean, there's some outlandish and crazy accusations and rumors that were going on. And Mike, there was a period of time where I had gotten married, and Mike wanted me to go back to Kansas City and face weird rumor tribunals or something like that. And my very level-headed husband was like, no. Like, this is nonsense. You know what I mean? Like, and so I went, to Mike and said, this is not going to happen. This isn't, I said, please. I had spent a few years since I had left IHOP before all this recent stuff that happened. I had at least had the understanding, because I was going through my own healing, in different areas. I understood that the leadership dynamic had been unhealthy. I had spent several years contacting ex-students of mine, and just asking, how was my leadership? What was hard? What was bad? And taking ownership of that. And I continue to do that. That is the first thing I say anytime I meet somebody that was from IHOP that says, I was in the school and you were a teacher, or you were this. It is the absolute first thing I say every time. And I'm going to keep doing that, because it needs to be said, and it's real and valid. So I had been doing that, but it was like this. There were these poisoning rumors that were going on that were turning different leaders against me. And then Mike was doing a weird dance. I figured it out, having talked to people over the last year. He was fueling rumors on one side, and then on the other side, he was acting like he was going to defend me and saying, how could you say this about my daughter? None of it's true. But the biggest pressure was to get me back out there, to lay down on the track and be run over by this semi train, And I have, for good or ill, I guess I'm going to use this phrase, but like IHOP is the gift that keeps on taking, And there's a certain point where I chose for my family and went, I'm not going to go back into the vortex of this weird dynamic that goes on out there where everyone is opinionated about every different area and you have to go and pay homage or whatever. And Mike turned on me. I had a video meeting with him and he said, if you won't do this, I won't recommend you for ministry. I won't, and I just said, I was crying because it was still a tearing that was going on in this father-daughter relationship. But I said, I've never asked you. I'm not even in ministry. There's nothing that I've asked you to do. I've not asked you for my recommendation. And I said, though I'm shocked that you wouldn't give it. I said, because is there anything that you've ever seen that would cause you to not give me that? And he said, well, it's what the other people are saying. It was just all vague and very odd. And I said, no, I'm not going to do it. And so he just, from that point on, and I know of board members that were telling friends of mine to not contact me anymore. It tore the relationship between me, very specifically between me and his victims. Like Deborah and I is a great example. It tore our relationship. The lies and the rumors and the pressure. And there were other friends of mine who were told, you will lose your job if you don't stop talking to her. So then no one ever saw me at any anniversary. My data was wiped from the history, the stories that I would have told in those first few years. And I remember hitting, I think it was trying to think which anniversary it would have been, and I might get it wrong, but I just remember being getting text messages during one of the big IHOP anniversaries. I guess it would have been the 25 year or something like that. And people just crying and saying, Shelley, it's just so wrong. It's like, you're not even here. Nothing that you ever did here. And I remember Mike saying to me, you could come, but there's a lot of people that are mad at you and probably better if you didn't. And so I don't understand it all, but there was this huge push to sever all my ties there and to, like you said, make me persona non grata. I think it was awesome for me. I don't mean that negatively or sarcastically. I needed it. And I remember watching a web stream of one of the anniversaries because I still watched and cared and, kind of cried a little bit and thought wow, those were the early days. I watched those anniversaries when I was gone. And I remember kind of just feeling oh God, it's so painful that I gave 17 years I was apart, 17 years. And it's I'm just wiped. And I remember just this really quiet impression hitting my heart and saying, Shelley, it's way better for you. Yeah. The sense I had was the approval was bad for me. It was not healthy and good. And if I had been there and been on that stage and it would have been oh, Shelley did this. And I realized it was yucky. I realized there was some, I didn't know how bad it was, but I knew this was unhealthy for me. Yeah. And I didn't feel super jaded about IHOP. I've not felt super jaded about IHOP in all these years. With all the stuff that they did still, I kind of moved through it and recognized this is actually good for me. It's causing me to be anchored in things like the Word of God and his God's approval and a great marriage and family and a new life. But it was very sad and it was grievous to me and grievous to some that were close to me. I remember Dwayne and Jennifer Roberts reached out to me and said, we don't know what happened to you, but we're just so sorry. We want to hear your story. And I remember that. It meant a lot to me and my husband, and the Hoods stood with me through all of that and just called it all bonkers. It was just we don't know what's happening, but this is sad. But in the end, it really, it came up in the end of my interview with Firefly because as someone objectively hears it, it seems very evident that Mike was separating me from the victims, that he was maybe feeling unsettled, that Deborah was going to tell me or others were going to say something to me. And that seems to be really make a lot of sense. And if it's because of their stories were starting to kind of crumble, or their compartmentalization was crumbling, or there was a sense that I'm a person that does go all in when I hear something like this. I don't know. And I might never know, but it was evil and it was sad and it was another round of wounding, but it was also kind of my deliverance that set me free from this bond and this need for approval. And it tore that up. I mean, it tore up. And it was really stunning. I'd never, in my 17 years with Mike, except for that one video time that I had with him where I was making my own boundary, and he doesn't like husbands, and he doesn't like boundaries. And he turned into like it was like a petulant toddler, as mom, I can now say. And it was crazy. And I remember observing it going, wow. And
because he lost his control.
He lost his
means and control. And to me, it's very telling that he said, I won't recommend you for ministry, which tells me that that's something he probably used over a lot of people. And it's something I've seen just repeatedly, within, especially, you've got your IHOP system, but often these systems are a part of the larger system, which I often refer to as the evangelical industrial complex, and you'll get blacklisted in the whole system. I'm not sure how that hits people who have felt who they were abused by Shelley, because I don't know everything that was happening there, and there may be some of the things that Mike was bringing up were valid things that people complained about as far as abuse goes, but there does seem like there was an awful lot of other stuff going as well. I hope this helps. I hope this gives you a fuller understanding. I think the most important thing in all of this is for there to be truth and for there to be justice. And again, my prayer is that there would be healing. So I do hope that this has helped. And those of you who have contacted me, feel free to continue doing that. There's a contact form at our website, julieroys.com. There's easy ways to get in contact with me. And I know some are in contact with Shelley right now. And so I would just really pray that these deep wounds, that they could be healed and that they would be healed. And I do want to just remind you about the podcast that will be coming out with the Tyler Deaton cult member, the former Tyler Deaton cult member, who was an eyewitness to many of these things that we talked about tonight. So you're not going to want to miss that. It's an important interview. And my hope is too, that as more of this comes out, and I know we kind of opened a can of worms with what happened with Tyler Deaton and then Micah Moore, my understanding is that the men from that cult who were there at the time of Bethany's death, none of them, again, I haven't gotten this directly from the DA, but it is my understanding from sources I've talked to that they haven't spoken. So there's a lot of truth that could come out, a lot more truth, and potentially justice. And for Bethany's parents and her family's sake, and I think for the great number of people at IHOP who were wounded because of what happened, such a traumatic experience for so many there, and the aftermath, and even the way it was handled. I just know there's a lot of wounds. I've spent 3 weeks listening to them, and I just hope and pray that there could be some resolution there and there could be some healing. So again, thanks so much for listening, and I really appreciate it.